Good morning, sixth graders, and happy Tuesday. 2 days this week of work. Yesterday, during our digital distance learning day, I asked you just to simply read an article called The Life Ways of the Ojibwe, which talked about some of the traditions that the Dakotas still hold dear and important to them. So, as you can see, the next kind of topic we're going to cover, much like the Dakota before them, we're going to cover early Ojibwe history in Minnesota. So, I'm just going to dive right in and start explaining what we're going to do today. We're going to kind of go backwards. Instead of learning about the most ancient Ojibwe history that goes with Minnesota, we're going to take today to learn about the traditions and culture of the Ojibwe that are still valued and practiced today. So, in other words, things that the Dakota did that the Ojibwe people, things that the Ojibwe people did thousands of years ago that are still important and being taught to the younger generation of Ojibwe today. On this picture here, you see a gentleman who looks like he's paddling his canoe through a field of grass, when in fact it's not grass, it's wild rice. And we'll learn really how important wild rice was and is to the Ojibwe culture. So, I already mentioned this for Monday's work. I just asked you to simply read that article about these Ojibwe traditions that they called life ways. And to start out today, I want to watch this 4.5 minute video with you. It's called Monoman, the food that grows on water. Now, it's a story here of this gentleman named Fred Akeley Jr., who's a Chippewa, or the word for Ojibwe, in northern Wisconsin, and he's going to talk about the importance of Monoman to him and to his life and to his culture. I want you to pay special attention to the first part of the video, where he goes through a very elaborate ceremony where he appears to be thanking the Mother Earth, where he's offering a sacrifice of something to the water. Just notice this and listen to his words about how important all this is to him.
There's an old Indian saying that to live here and understand the world, you gotta love it. Some people love money, some people love material things. I love that rice. I do. I love that rice and that lake out there. I loved it all my life.
Ahoy mama tu ke mashomo sunan. Dapawa se ma se mi gwech ke chimana tu. Minu gijik nungom anashinabi kwe. Oh, shmokamana mi gwech ke chimana.
I'm 65 now, so that's 55 years that I've actually been out there somewhere doing rice. My mom made us go pick it and buy our own school clothes. So I learned the different things of that manoma and what it does for me. These two little bony arms, once I get going out there, I don't want to quit. I got this rhythm. You call it a wham, 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 wham. That's the rhythm. Now a polar, he keeps up with that rice. He goes into the rice stuff and tries to get the best heads he sees. So that guy's rhythm gets all them plants on both sides. As much as we can get in every 2 hits. He's pulling. I'm keeping that tap. In my mind, every time I hit a new plant, I'm saying, miigwech, thank you. Every miigwech in my mind. And then the rice comes in for me. Because I'm honoring and praying to that rice. Giving it that respect that's going to keep me and my partner going, no matter if I'm pulling or the guy tapping the rhythm. When I touch them cedar sticks on that rice and it comes off, I know them babies are going to eat. My drum's going to be fed. The life's going to go on for another year. That's gratitude. My grandma used to call it roasting and parching. She liked to use the word roasting better because of the aroma and what she did with her hands and fire and tools she used to make that come out dehydrated enough to last all winter for 5 years, maybe. If you don't get it wet or if you store it right, it'll be good for you. That medicine. In my growing up in my traditions, the older people told me that the Creator gave us this monomen to help us survive for our time that we spend here with Him. It's the Creator's food, and that Mother Earth, she gives it to us to use. That's why they call it food that grows on the water. So I'm trying to keep that for all the Anishinaabe people and prayers going and eating that food every year. Because we believe if we stop that tradition, that the world's going to stop. That's why it's important for the Indian people to keep on with our traditions and our spiritual thinking. Because if we stop, what if the world does stop?
So as we watched that video, it was apparent to me that uh, this whole process was very important to this man. It was almost spiritual, almost religious. He gave sacrifices, tobacco sacrifice to the water. He offered up a sacrifice of the wild rice itself. But he talked about it and remembered it for 55 years of his life. And not only is it food that grows on water, he also referred to it as medicine, which I thought was very interesting. Now, wild rice is a plant that grows in the shallow lakes of Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Canada. So it's been used for thousands of years as a source of life, as a source of food. What I would like you to do now is to go ahead and go into your drive, if you could, please. And I'll show you what it looks like to you here. There's something here called Dakota Lifeways Guided Notes, and it says student. I'd like you to open that up if you could. And to you guys, yours is going to look like this. They're guided notes. There are some of the words here that are blank, or some definitions, and then the word is blank. And then there are the definitions and then the actual vocabulary term itself that are missing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through this with you. I'll try and go as slow as I possibly can without putting someone to sleep. And once I'm done, then at the bottom, there are 3 what I call reflection questions that kind of go along with you reading the article completely and then watching this video. And then there's some answers that I'm going to require you to put down here. Now, these are what I would call open-ended questions, level 2 type of questions, where you have to take information that you've learned and kind of dream up your own answer. So your answer may be different than your neighbor's based on what you see and how you comprehended it. But whatever you put down here, please make sure it's in complete sentences. And of course, when you are complete, you should go ahead and submit this and then mark it as turned in. Don't turn it in if it's not done. Okay, that's a habit some of us are getting into that we need to stop. This is due at midnight tonight, so if you don't get done in class time, work on it and finish it. Don't just hurriedly click turn it in at the end of the hour and hope that's going to save you. It's not. While you're opening this document, I'd just like to remind you that tomorrow we'll have a quite busy day in social studies because we have our 50 states test. That will be on paper. All you're going to have to do is write down abbreviation for the state, which I will give you off a numbered map, And then those of you who have indicated to me that you would like to retest from the social studies test that we took last week, we'll do that as well. Okay, so let's begin. The first box here, Native American culture, traveled to Minnesota in the 1600s. They lived in northern Minnesota, Canada, and Wisconsin, called themselves the original people. I would love it if you typed in the word Ojibwe, please. Okay, next. Called the Anishinaabe, Chippewa, or Ojibwe. The word Ojibwe means people of puckered-toed moccasins. And that, of course, again, would be the Ojibwe. Now, you will see textbooks that spell it multiple different ways. I don't know why. In popular culture today, sometimes you see Chippewa. Sometimes you'll see Ojibwe spelled like W-A-Y. Truthfully and correctly, these people should be called Anishinaabe. But for whatever reason, it's kind of morphed into these three other words. So your textbook uses this, so we'll just make sure that we know all these synonyms. Third one, animal hide with fur attached. These are often very, very valuable in trade. That is called a pelt. So in the next chapter, we're going to study the importance of beaver pelts and how they were used as currency. For the Ojibwe, rabbit pelts, muskrat pelts, deer pelts, they were something that were used as value in trade with other cultures, and they were used very importantly by the Ojibwe themselves. Okay, next one is types of food gathered. So the first one says a liquid syrup taken from the maple tree in the spring. Now, according to the article, that would of course be maple sap. So often I see kids write down maple syrup for answers like this. The syrup is what is refined from the sap. So you take the sap, this watery substance, and you boil it down, and then you get syrup. But the sap that you take from the maple tree is clear and very watery at first. Next one is wild rice. And my definition is simply this: food that grows on water. And it was harvested in mid-August. So often people claim that this was harvested in late fall. No, it was, harvested in August while it's still green. If it's allowed to stay on the plant until September, most of the time the seeds would fall off and go into the water and be useless to the Dakota. So, or Ojibwe. So they had to harvest it in mid-August while it's still green. Okay, the gathering one here is done for you already. The gathering is the act of, in the summertime especially, fish, berries, nuts, wild onions, mushrooms, cattail roots. And a lot of times these things that were gathered were then dried. Dried so that they could be used throughout the winter months, which was very important to survival. Last one, beavers, muskrat, rabbits were snared and trapped. That would be small game. So I'll kind of highlight these so you can see. The next part of the article that you read yesterday talked about the sugar bush. And as I mentioned earlier, this is the activity of the springtime. Timing is very vital on this. The sugar bush was visited by the Ojibwe in the time probably in mid-March when it gets warm during the day, but then freezes at night. The sap would really flow in those trees then. And the question says, how many gallons of sap was required to make 1 gallon of syrup? And the best answer that I can give you that I found is it takes 40 gallons of sap to make 1 gallon of syrup. Now, through that whole process, they would have to boil the sap down. Very watery. They would boil it down using rocks and hollowed out logs. And it would take hours and hours to boil that down. They'd boil all the water off. And by the end, then they'd have that gallon of syrup, which was a little bit thicker and darker in color. If they wanted to turn it into sugar, they would have to boil it even further and boil off all the water until just the sugar crystals were left. Now, the maple sugar could mean the difference between life and death in the winter months. It was called a superfood. Now, I kind of chuckle when I write this. The Ojibwe never called it a superfood, but in culture today, it's called superfood because it can help heal or ward off some of the diseases. Interesting little sidebar there. But the Ojibwe knew this. And they, of course, would value this food quite a bit because it was something that had medicinal properties. A few more here. Hang with me. So then, obviously, in the next one, wild rice grows best in lakes. It's harvested in mid-August. So we'll put down here wild rice in this one. Highlight that box so you can see that. Next. So the processing of the wild rice is really quite simple. The first part is roasting over fire called parching. You're taking the wild rice and you're essentially cooking it really quickly to dry it out. Once you dry it out, the next step is called jigging. That's where you take the wild rice that's been roasted, you put it into a clean container of some type, or maybe on the ground on top of a clean deer hide. And then the young boys would take brand new moccasins, and then they would step on the wild rice and kind of twist their feet and grind the hulls off of the wild rice. There's this thin, hard covering that covers the wild rice kernels, and you need to take that off. And so that jigging process is very important. Now, once you had done the jigging process, the last step is often called winnowing, where they would take the wild rice and the hulls that are kind of together, and then they would kind of toss it up in the air, and the wind would catch the chaff and the hulls, insects that may be in there, and blow them away. And what you'd have left would be the dried wild rice seed. Now, as the man in the video mentioned, that would last, if properly prepared, for up to 2, maybe 3 years. So you could store that in a container, and you could eat that all winter long. Okay? Final part of the video here is the snaring and trapping of small game. The first animal mentioned in that article was the snowshoe rabbit. Very large rabbit, big feet. That was a very important activity in the winter months for the Ojibwe. They would most often snare the rabbits, which meant they would make this little noose, and the rabbits would travel on this trail every time, and the rabbit would be running, and it would get caught in the noose, and it would be killed very quickly and very efficiently. When that happened, the meat is obviously eaten. The fur and hide were used for clothing. And when a child was able to snare their first rabbit or maybe shoot it with a bow and arrow, it was a large feast and celebration, as the article said. It was a big deal. And part of that feast and celebration was reminding the children to share, and reminding the children how important this animal was to their survival. So they would often thank the animal before they uh, cleaned it and used the meat. Final one. We could say here beaver or muskrat. These are animals that were water animals. They were trapped under the water using nets. The meat was eaten. Nothing was wasted. And the fur was then used for insulation or clothing, and most likely, though, for trade. Muskrat and beaver pelts became very valuable to the Europeans when they arrived in the 1690s. In fact, much of the exploration that the Europeans did in Minnesota, today's Minnesota and Wisconsin, was to look for sources of beaver pelts, because as we'll learn in the next chapter, beaver pelts were extremely valuable in Europe. So we talked about the giving thanks, and we saw that in the video, and we read about that in the article. The Ojibwe were very adept, I should say, at giving thanks and offering a sacrifice to their gods or to the animal when they harvested it. That's a very important process, a very important step. So now it's your turn. There are 3 open-ended questions here. We want you to read the question very carefully. Go ahead and answer it, and make sure it's in complete sentences. Some of you still struggle with this. Take your time. It's not a race. Answer the question completely based on what you know. As I said earlier, your answers may differ from your neighbors, and that's just fine. Once you're done answering all 3 of these sentences, go ahead and submit it. Click Turned In. And then remember, we have a 50 states quiz tomorrow, so run through that game. There are millions of websites with other ways to practice your 50 states. Go ahead and find those and be prepared tomorrow. And if you want to retest, if your score is below 70%, drop me an email. There's been like 6 of you who have wanted to do this, and I'll prepare that for you tomorrow, and then it'll be your responsibility to take that. Have a great day. 1 day left until break.